Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to do something completely different. And I'm going to go back to the 19th century and talk about Gilbert and Sullivan, because I'm a huge Gilbert and Sullivan fan. I know this channel is mainly Beatles related, Bob Dylan, but I've been meaning to do this for a while, and if you're not into Gilbert and Sullivan or not interested, just switch off. I'll try and make it as informative as I can and as interesting as I can, but if it's not your bag, then feel free to press stop. So W.S. Gilbert, who wrote the lyrics, 1836 to 1911, Arthur Seymour Sullivan, 1842 to 1900. So they wrote operas, light English comic operas, between the years of 1871 and 1896. Started off with a relative failure in Thespis, which has since been lost, then hit favour and fame with Trial by Jury, and then just went from strength to strength for most of their career after that. As you could see by Arthur Sullivan's birth dates, he died pretty young, aged 58. Gilbert lived to be 75 before drowning in his own lake in his house in Harrow, trying to rescue a young lady who was struggling in the water. So I've got various things to show you. I'm going to show you some stuff from my collection. I think I'll start off with this wonderful plate which my mother found for me in the local Oxfam in Wimbledon. It's a centenary plate from 1975, which was the 100th anniversary of Trial by Jury, and it's got all the operas depicted in picture form around the edge, and an explanation on the back there with the years, which opera came in which year, and it wasn't too expensive. You can pick that up on eBay for around £15, I think. So, but that's priceless to me. I didn't even know it existed. Wonderful. I mentioned this film in my top movies. Just watched it yesterday in preparation for this video. Wonderful movie with Jim Broadbent and Alan Corduna as Gilbert and Sullivan, respectively. It's centred around the making of the Mikado, which is perhaps their best known work, and in this other movie, 1954, with Robert Morley, as I also watched the other day as well. Gilbert and Sullivan remained immensely popular throughout the rest of the 19th century and throughout 20th century up until about, I'd say, around the 80s, when D'Oyly Carte struggled financially and went out of business. D'Oyly Carte is the name of the company who funded and launched Gilbert and Sullivan under their manager, Mr. D'Oyly Carte. That company went bankrupt in 1982, but they remained very popular throughout, say, the 50s, when my father got into them, for example. And this is some stuff from my father's collection. This is Trial by Jury. This is Iolanthe in 2 volumes from 1882, and then we've got Yeoman of the Guard, also in 2 volumes from 1888, and The Gondoliers in 2 volumes. These records are not just nice to have. They're not particularly valuable, but they're nice to have because they were from my dad's collection. And then I first got into the Gilbert and Sullivan through this cassette, The World of Gilbert and Sullivan, which is late 70s, I think, and that was the cassette form. I've since picked them up on vinyl, and they basically contain highlights from the operas. About 4 different operas featured on each volume. Comes in 3 volumes, and so many of you out there may think you're not familiar with Gilbert and Sullivan, but many of their tunes are quite well known, and if you hear them, you might recognise the tune. For example, A Policeman's Lot Is Not a Happy One from the Pirates of Penzance is very well known. I'm the Very Model of a Major General, also from Pirates, is a well-known tune, and people have parodied that throughout the ages. We've got stuff from the Mikado, Wandering Minstrel Eye, Take a Pair of Sparkling Eyes from the Gondoliers, some beautiful tunes. And actually, if you want to listen to just some tunes without the words, without Gilbert's topsy-turvy words, then this wonderful CD collects the overtures to all the operas, which basically has a potpourri of all the major tunes from each opera, and wonderful tunes throughout. Sullivan was a master of a catchy tune and a beautiful melody. And he was actually, if you watch the movies and if you read the biographies, he was pretty much criticised at the time by many serious music people who said he should be concentrating on serious music, becoming the next great English composer, or to follow in the steps of the great classical composers, and not frittering away his time on comic operas. But Sullivan quickly realised that the money was far too good to turn down on the comic operas, and so he at times reluctantly, but for the best part of 25 years he made 13 successful operas with Gilbert, and 140 years later he's best known for those operas. He's released other stuff, but it's not particularly memorable, and it's certainly not as fun. What Gilbert and Sullivan did, for those of you who don't know, is they poked fun at English society. This is the late Victorian period, and they took the mickey out of the army, the police, the politicians, the House of Lords, in wonderfully satirical, amusing style. Gilbert was very witty, and he wasn't too cruel. He was occasionally cruel, particularly to women in his portrayal of women, and particularly the elder women came in for some pretty unkind treatment from Gilbert. But his satire on society was pretty much tongue-in-cheek, and maybe that prevented him from getting knighted until 1907, just 4 years before his death, because Sullivan got knighted a hell of a lot earlier, in the 1880s. So it was a 23-year gap or 22-year gap between Gilbert getting knighted after Sullivan. That's quite interesting. This is a Reader's Digest triple volume edition, which my mum picked up for me on my 40th birthday. What else have we got? We got these. This is a collection of cigarette cards, John Player cigarette cards from 1925. I've got a complete set of 50 from 1925, and then a second set from 1927. And they used to come free. Unfortunately, we can't ask anyone who was around at the time because there's no one still alive. But if you bought a packet of John Player cigarettes, you got a free card, at least one, and maybe you got 2 or 3 inside. Because if you'd only got one, it would take ages to collect the set of 50. And in fact, I'm not sure how many packets of cigarettes you'd actually statistically have to buy in order to pick up all 50, because you're not going to get the same one. You're not going to get different ones every time. So I'm guessing you got maybe 3 in each pack, but I could be wrong, and I guess people were busy swapping them as well. In the song On My Way to Work from New, Paul McCartney talks about people dropping their cigarette packets on the floor and him picking them up, and I think that was a reference to him collecting cigarette cards, not Gilbert and Sullivan by the 60s or the 50s. But it was a long-standing practice, and if you look on eBay, you've got dozens and dozens of not only John Player but other cigarette companies doing the same thing. And it's the same thing as you have today with people giving away something free when you buy something. So, but it was unique to its time, and I'm very happy to have these. They're worth about £50 each per set, but I picked them up for quite a bit less. I've got several books. This is probably my favourite Gilbert and Sullivan book. Very educational, and there's a picture of Sullivan there. There's no actual picture of Gilbert and Sullivan together, which is this is Gilbert on his own here. Can't think why they wouldn't have asked them to pose for a photo, because it's the camera had been clearly invented, as you see from these photos. So that's a bit of a mystery. Maybe a photo will turn up one of these days. This was an old book from the 50s, Leslie Bailey, Gilbert and Sullivan. When I bought that, tucked inside the back of this was this charming leaflet by Guinness for Christmas 1961, where they take various Gilbert and Sullivan songs and rewrite the words to make them into Guinness adverts. And it's a charming little book, and this is worth a bit as well, so very, very happy to have that. This is from the Deadeye film 1975, with drawings by Ronald Searle, and the Pirate King from Pirates and Penzance. He looks a bit like, he reminds me of Gerald Scarfe in his style. And on the back here, there's quite interesting information about the date of the first performance of each opera. And actually today, 31st December, is the 141st anniversary of the Fifth Avenue, New York premiere of Pirates of Penzance. And what they did for Pirates of Penzance to discourage the pirates, pun not intended, because with Pinafore, the previous one, a lot of companies had put on their own version of the opera without paying them royalties. So to stop this, they copyrighted this both in the US and in the UK by performing the premiere in Paynton in Cornwall on the 30th of December 1879, and then Fifth Avenue, New York on the 31st of December 1879. So I thought that was quite interesting. This is another really big favourite book of mine, Ian Bradley's superbly detailed, annotated Gilbert and Sullivan. As he says in the foreword or something, Gilbert and Sullivan is to be listened, not to be analysed, but I find it a superb companion piece to the music. Not only does it have the libretto, the opening chorus of the Pirates of Penzance, pour, oh, pour the pirate sherry, fill, oh, fill the pirate glass, and to make us more than merry, let the pirate bumper pass. Which one is this one? Oh yeah, my favourite from each of this, Pinafore, where the ruler of the Queen's Navy is doing this hilarious song about he came to be the ruler of the Navy without even boarding a ship. So the last verse is, "Now landsman or whoever you may be, if you want to rise to the top of the tree, if your soul isn't fettered to an office stool, be careful to be guided by this golden rule. Stick close to your desk and never go to sea, and you all may be ruler of the Queen's Navy." I love that. Just highlighted a few things throughout here. I mean, I won't go through all the operas, obviously. There's 13 of them. The song from Act 2 of Iolanthe from Private Willis has the classic line about, "I often think it's comical how nature always does contrive that every boy and every gal that's born into the world alive is either a little liberal or else a little conservative." And that's been much quoted over the years. Princess Ida is another opera which is horrendously underrated. I wasn't going to rank them, but I have got a ranking for you at the end of this video. What else have we got? Some gondoliers picked up in Venice, which have got nothing to do with the opera, the gondoliers. It just reminded me of the gondoliers. I've got some original manuscripts from the 1880s, HMS Pinafore, Patience, owned by E.S. Morrison, 1881, you can see there, and the Mikado. So they're not in brilliant nick, but it's again, this was part of my 40th birthday present from my mum. She did well. I'm not sure where she picked them up from. This is another favourite book of mine, Gilbert and Sullivan's London. And it's very much written in the same style as the Beatles' London, which shows you all the areas in London where the Beatles got up to in the 60s. And this book shows you where everyone lived, where Gilbert lived, where Sullivan lived, where they used to meet, where the Savoy Theatre was, of course, on the Strand. Coupled with pictures. So this is a picture of Grimsdyke in Harrow, where Gilbert lived the last 20 years of his life, and it's just a wonderful book. The Secrets of the Savoyard, written by Henry Lytton, who was a famous d'Oyly Carte vocalist in the 20th century, first half of. Another superb book from Ian Bradley, which describes how Gilbert and Sullivan kept going. It was famous in the 1880s, 1890s, and then kept going with revivals in the 1920s, 1950s, 1960s. And that brings me to the CD collection. Most of these CDs, they've got the same cover, so I won't show you all of them, but most of them were recorded by the D'Oyly Carte Opera Company with John Reed as the lead, and Thomas Round, Donald Adams, and Owen Brannigan, and a few other people like Kenneth Sanford, and it's just wonderful. I've got all of them, and they're all great. And then I've got some of the Malcolm Sargent productions from a bit earlier, actually, late 50s, early 60s, Gondoliers and Patience and Ruddigore. So that was that. I think I'm getting to the end of this. Another very nice thing from the early 90s, the complete Savoy operas in 2 volumes with the complete libretto. That's very nice to have. So most of the operas don't get performed too much anymore these days, but the amateur production companies are still doing them in the provinces. Occasionally in London you'll see a performance of Pirates of Penzance or HMS Pinafore or the Mikado, but those tend to be the only 3, which is a great shame. And some of their more obscure operas I've never seen ever, and including Utopia Limited and the Grand Duke, the last 2, which quite have several redeeming features. I haven't seen them at all. Never seen Ruddigore. Seen Iolanthe once. That's just my favourite. I've never seen Patience. Saw Gondoliers the other year for the first time. So I also wanted to tell you a few connections between Gilbert and Sullivan and Doctor Who for those of you who may be interested. So the house that Gilbert lived in, Grimsdyke in Harrow, from 1890 to 1911, was also where Doctor Who, with Patrick Troughton as the Doctor, filmed Evil of the Daleks, which unfortunately only one of the episodes survives from, but they're probably going to make it animated, so you might see that wonderful house. And apparently that house is a hotel. You can go there and stay, and I keep on meaning to at least go there and have a cup of tea, but never get round to it. Peter Pratt, who played the Master in The Deadly Assassin, was a member of the Dolly Cart company 1945 to 59 and was the lead vocalist, and is actually on my Mikado performance here, I think. Or he's on one of the Mikado performances I have, not the Malcolm Sargent, he's on the Dolly Cart. And then thirdly, the 1982 performance of Pirates of Penzance at the London Drury Lane Theatre had Sylvester McCoy as Samuel and Bonnie Tyler as Kate. So that was interesting, I thought. So I wasn't going to do a ranking, but I wrote it out a bit neater, but I can't seem to find my other copy of it. So this is my ranking of the Savoy operas. The top 5 could really be first equal because they're all utterly brilliant, and just because the Grand Duke and Utopia are at the bottom, I had to put something bottom. And they, as I say, things like the Roulette song from the Grand Duke are thoroughly enjoyable. Got a DVD collection here, made by the George Walker Company in early 80s, which are quite nice to have. Quite well performed. Some famous actors there I seem to remember. Can't remember the names, but nice to have. But that doesn't include Utopia Limited or Grand Duke, unfortunately. They obviously, because they weren't very successful at the time, they didn't bother doing them, so that's a shame. But I like all of the operas. I'm a great fan, and I think Gilbert and Sullivan will continue to last in the imaginations of particularly the English-speaking world. Maybe they were popular at the time across continental Europe, but less so these days probably. But they still, even the satire which they produced back then is still somewhat relevant today, particularly on the House of Lords from Iolanthe. House of Lords still hasn't gone away, still poking its nose in and stuff. So that's spoof as part of Iolanthe is very timeless in many ways, or until the House of Lords gets abolished, that is. So that was Gilbert and Sullivan. Hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you next time.